Linda Moldenhauer's phone call. Her phone was tapped, and they got my phone number, and through the telephone company, they were able to find me, and so on.
When they found you, what happened?
I was going to a grocery store. Two guys in a black suits come out of a black Lincoln town car and came over to see me. And they told me that I'd better not publish anything or talk to Linda about any more things. So at that time, I did, I stopped.
That was enough to intimidate you.
Yes. Rather remain anonymous.
Look at the relationship, I try to, of the United States with its allied nations. The United States, of course, is without question the senior partner in nearly all of its relations with other nations. You look at Europe, which is nothing really more than a vassal of the United States at this point through NATO. You look at the Canadian government and military, ditto. You look at a U.S. relationship with all of its other, for a perfect example, when you study the global military spending, all right, right now the United States spends about 40% of all military spending in the world. That's by far and away the greatest. Now there's China and Russia, which are 2 and 3 in the ranking, 8% and 3%. And then all of the other nations that follow are, in fact, U.S. vassal states, I would suggest to you. Even a nation like Brazil, which has been under essentially an undeclared U.S. attack in the last few months, the former Brazilian president, Dilma Rousseff, who we know through the Snowden revelations, her cell phone, her emails, all of the cell phone and emails of her ministers were all monitored by NSA. If Dilma Rousseff had wanted to say something like this, the heck with the United States secrecy, we have our own UFO cases, we're going to disclose them. I guarantee you, Dilma Rousseff would have to be very careful about her planning of such an event, because none of it would go without the so-called Five Eyes, that is NSA and NSA equivalents in other nations. They would know. The United States has, this is never discussed in international politics, but the United States dominates nearly all of the other nations, except China, except Russia, and a few other smaller nations like Iran and Syria and so forth, North Korea. But Russia and China are the big wild cards. That's a whole other conversation we'll need to have. I believe the reason for the secrecy in general, partly U.S. domination over the system, and then partly over genuine fear of all of these nations over the implications of what would absolutely be a post-petroleum economy, because there's no way that a president's going to say these flying saucers or UFOs are real. It'll take all of 5 minutes before people start to realize they're using something other than petroleum to go from point A to point B. And implicit then is a post-petroleum global infrastructure.
We have to remember that right after World War II, the Army Air Force was separated and became the Air Force, a separate branch of service. And that the OSS, which was the Office of Special Services, was disbanded and eventually became the CIA. The President Truman, at that time, convened a very high-level committee to examine this alien or UFO phenomenon. They did come to the conclusion that it was alien, and the military rightly came to the conclusion, if they're hostile, there's nothing we can do about it. Therefore, their choice was to deny it and to hush it up and create the National Security Act of 1947, which validated that deception and covered it up and allowed the group to go underground, as it were. And we've been living with that now for 50 years. It is really the beginning of the whole cover-up, the entire denial of this phenomenon.
I think, looking at the sorts of interesting reports in these files, the ones from police officers, pilots, military personnel, the ones tracked on radar, there's material there that certainly makes me think twice. It's not all misidentifications of aircraft lights and weather balloons.
Is there any one report that stands out as extraordinary or perhaps most convincing?
One in the new files that I particularly like is a radar sighting where an object travelled 10 nautical miles in 12 seconds, about 3,500 miles an hour.
For 22 and a half years, I served in the United States Army. During my tenure, I was on many occasions asked to serve as the official, unofficial UFO consultant dealing with UFO matters in the areas of my assignment. As a result of my involvement, I was able to ascertain that the United States government knew a whole lot more about UFOs than it was telling the American public. That there was an intelligence involved, that there was a highly evolved technology. I learned that to a degree, we were carrying on a dialogue with this intelligence. We were making every effort we could to acquire this technology and make it part of our own existing technology. We did this, I was told, in the interest of national security. We also had an officially sanctioned deception program. This was in total disregard as to the impact this would have on the individual witnesses and also on their families. This ultimately led to my disillusionment with the program and my involvement in it. While I was in the military and I got to the point where I was no longer interested in trying to be part of the program and actually was going against the program, this resulted in every effort being made to try to destroy my military career. I was threatened and they even tried to force my military retirement, or I could face possible court-martial. These actions failed, of course, as you know. At one point, I even had an individual come up to me, point a gun at my head, and inform me we could have a training accident, and this would end this foolishness once and for all.
There is a cover-up, or what the reasons may be for governments wishing to cover up the facts about UFOs. What I'd like to say is that there is a serious possibility that we are being visited and have been visited for many years by people from outer space, from other civilizations, that it behoves us, in case some of these people in the future or now should turn hostile, to find out who they are, where they come from, and what they want.
Well, Don, it began for me in 1963 when I was assigned to the Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers in Europe. I arrived in the summer of '63 and I was assigned to the Operations Division. I was further assigned to what we call SHOC, the War Room, the Supreme Headquarters Operations Center. And at that time I was given a cosmic top secret clearance, which was and still is the highest level of security access that NATO has. When I was assigned to the War Room, I learned that a study had been initiated in 1961, and everybody was talking about it. They were gossiping about it. And the subject was UFOs, and that intrigued me a bit. When that study was concluded in 1964 and it was published, and I was still working in the War Room at that time, I had access to this document. I had a chance to read it. And having been exposed to it, I must tell you honestly that my life has never ever quite been the same. Because I read first-hand reports, verifiable NATO military material that indicated that the UFOs were not only real, but they represented something far beyond anything I had ever imagined before. When the study was concluded in '64, they concluded that there were 4 different groups apparently coming and visiting us. Out of those 4 different groups, one group looked exactly like we do, so much so that they could sit beside you in a restaurant or in an airplane or in a theater, and you'd never know. And that particular point bothered the military guys a lot. The point being that some of these people from somewhere could be walking up and down the corridors of SHAPE headquarters, or they could be walking up and down the corridors of the Pentagon. One day at lunch, a lieutenant colonel made the remark, he says, Jesus, do you realize they could even be in the White House? And there was a little forced laughter at that point, I remember, because a lot of us over the years have had some misgivings about the occupants of the White House. But the point I'm making is that the idea that aliens could be here in our midst bothered the military, because if you're not paranoid when you go into the service, you're certainly trained very quickly to be so.
The Capitol going to be part of the Eisenhower push. He's trying to find out something about, all about these aliens that MJ-12 was supposed to find out, but never sent back reports to him.
The MJ-12, the UFO control group, were they calling it MJ-12 at that time?
Yes.
Eisenhower was going to invade
Yes,
Area 51.
Yeah, with the First Army.
So you go out with your superior.
Yes.
You fly out. You land. What happens? Can you describe this whole process, what you saw?
It took us the 13 or 15 miles south to S4. Had like different garage door openings.
Okay.
And in these garage door openings, they had like different saucer crafts. The very first one had the Roswell craft in. It was kind of crashed up, but apparently every alien that was in it died except for a couple.
So you see the Roswell craft, and what are some of the others that you see?
Well, the Roswell craft was really strange because it looked like real heavy aluminum foil. We could rock next to it and you could rock it. The whole thing probably weighed 150, 300 pounds.
But that was only part of the story. The shape conclusions in '64 were that there were 4 groups that we knew of. They were apparently interplanetary. Some very likely were interstellar. They even concluded that some of them could be intergalactic. When I retired in 1976, many of our military people knew at that point that we were not simply dealing with visitations from people from other planets or star systems. They had concluded by '76 that some of these visitors very well might be multidimensional in their source. The evidence that we had collected and the evidence that they had repeatedly demonstrated to us, and that's no accident. It became very clear after a time that there was a program or a process of some kind underway, that they had demonstrated over and over and over again that they apparently were able to manipulate matter and time. Now, this really shook up our scientists. There are a lot of new young scientists in particle physics today who talk about multiple dimensions. There's a brilliant young professor in New York by the name of Michio Kaku, who has written a brilliant book called Hyperspace, where they talk about 10 separate dimensions. I'm not enough of a physicist to try to explain to you what a dimension is, but the idea that there could be intelligences from somewhere else, from other dimensions coming and going into our reality. It's been quite a shakeup in traditional science. The truth, Don, apparently is simply this, that we're not alone, we've never been alone. We are apparently part of an infinite universe filled with intelligent life. The shape study concluded in '64 that if they, whoever they were malevolent or hostile, that they could have taken this planet and cleaned it up and eliminated us, turned us into dog food or whatever, a long, long time ago. That the historical evidence indicates that they've been with us a long time, and I've concluded that we had what I like to call an intimate interrelationship with at least one of those groups, the group that looks exactly like we do.
I know we're not alone in the universe. I know that the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. It's evidence that has been denied to the American people. I stand before you today in my almighty God, and I tell you this. If Congress calls me in and says, will you testify in detail what you know, I stand here today prepared and ready to do just that. Governments must never lie to the people.
Viewed the autopsy film, and then the colonel said, what we've got in here is we're interviewing a gray alien.
All right, right there. How did you feel at that moment?
Well, I thought, boy, we had no idea we were going to see the real thing. All we saw was film.
You had to have a little bit of heart racing at that
Yes.
moment.
My boss was able to go in and had like a partial interview with him.
So what did this gray alien look like? Could you describe him a little bit?
This one looked a little bit oriental.
So I'm just wondering if it looked almost human, what about this didn't look human?
No, it didn't look human as far as the skin tone and basically the shape of it and the size.
How was its head size compared with a normal human, for example?
Brain was kind of a little bit bigger. And some of the nose was very, very small. And the ears were just like holes. Mouth was very small.
Now, why were they bringing you out here at all, anyway, to see an alien? What was the point?
To go back and tell the president they actually had one.
So he did not know at this point
No.
if there was an alien at S4?
No. So he asked us what was going on, and we told him about the alien, the whole situation, and the black projects and so on. And he was just totally shocked. He appeared for the first time to be worried. You know, like he was worried.
I would think that Eisenhower would, I mean, he certainly knew that flying saucers were real.
Yes.
He knew that there were aliens. So I guess I'm just wondering, what would he have been, really surprised about?
Surprised about the black programs. Eisenhower said, gotta keep this thing completely secret. You know, can't talk about this.